hear a little bit about this in the modern world, but to a large extent, they're selling this idea that some people are happy because they got better genetics or a better hand of cards. So the fact that it's a learned skill, and that anyone can learn it, and I liken it to learning a foreign language, because everyone knows it's possible to learn a foreign language in adulthood, but it's so hard that most people don't. Yet, we learned foreign language in childhood without knowing that we were making an effort. And in the same way, we learned our emotional wiring in childhood, in the same way, just from repetition of what's around us. So it's really that choosing to repeat something different and then having to repeat it a lot.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. It's a beautiful day here in Wisconsin. Spring has sprung, and I'm hoping spring is where you are as well. The world is beautiful, life is beautiful, the earth is beautiful, and we just are here to live it as fully as possible. This podcast is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening to guide you on your spiritual lives and to guide you on expressing yourself as your authentic self. So thank you for joining me and for supporting this podcast. Let me introduce my guest today. Loretta Graziano Breuning is the author of several best-selling books, including Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. And her most recent book is Why You're Unhappy, Biology versus Politics. These books, along with her videos and her other books and podcasts, explain the brain chemistry we've inherited from earlier mammals. She's the founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, which offers videos, podcasts, books, blogs, multimedia, a training program, and a free 5-day Happy Chemical Jumpstart. Loretta is also Professor Emerita of Management at California State University, East Bay. And prior to teaching, she worked for the United Nations in Africa. There's a lot more to Loretta, but I'm going to leave it at that. Welcome, Loretta.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to really delve into your work. I just found it so interesting. But before we do that, I've got a few rapid fire questions for you, and let's see how that goes. You've agreed to doing that. I'm wondering if in just a couple sentences, we'll get into it later, but if it just a couple sentences, like if an elevator was somebody and they said, "What is your message?" What would you concisely say your message is?
The brain chemicals that make us feel good are inherited from earlier animals, and they're not designed to be on all the time. They are designed to reward animals when they promote their survival. So we can feel good about whatever happy chemicals we have without expecting us to be on a high all the time.
Love it. Love it. Can't wait to get into that. Okay. Is there anybody in your life who, well, we all have been inspired by people, but can you name somebody that may have been a particularly significant inspiration to you?
Oh, so my first book is dedicated to David Attenborough. He is the voice of nature videos that most people are familiar with. But in fact, nature videos were telling the truth about the social behavior of animals when academic psychology was not. So that's one reason I thank him, although he's sort of gone off into the warm fuzzy herd, but he told the truth for decades. And also that most people don't realize, they think he's just the narrator, but he was actually the driving force behind the whole ability to put a camera near, like a chimpanzee giving birth or something like that. I exaggerated. I don't think they've ever gotten a chimpanzee giving birth.
Yeah, but I get the idea of it. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the idea of the herd that we're constantly being pulled into. I can't wait to talk about that. Okay, now this is an interesting question. I haven't asked anybody yet, but I was kind of guided to ask you this question, so we'll see where it goes. We've all had lots of aha moments in our life. And I'm wondering if you might want to share an aha moment where suddenly you learned something new that really, really inspired you or caused you to think differently.
Sure. So, what got me onto this whole track that I'm on now with the Inner Mammal Institute, I read this book called Chimpanzee Politics, and it explained that chimpanzees are constantly fighting over food and fighting over mating opportunity. And the one that gets more food and mating opportunity spreads their genes. And so we have all inherited that impulse. And that was like one aha, because again, I said, how come I've never heard about this? But then the other half of that is that the author of that book, 25 years later, they did an anniversary edition. And then 5 years after that, he quit his own mindset and his own reality and started selling the warm, fuzzy view of chimpanzees. And then he became like really popular guy that's on everywhere.
So interesting. I want to believe in the warm fuzzy too, but you're pulling me away. You're waking me up, and it's really an interesting awakening for me. So I'm very grateful for your book, and I'm trying to integrate it into my worldview. And it's a struggle. When new
Yeah,
information
yeah,
comes, and it's like,
yeah,
whoa,
yes,
I
yeah,
I can't dismiss this, but how am I gonna fit it? And then it's
yeah.
like, I can't fit it, so somehow I've got to integrate it. That's how I really feel about your work, and I love how you talk about the what did you call the warm fuzzy? Our need to go to that warm fuzzy to not necessarily see reality as it is, but as more of a make believe. It's a fascinating tendency that we have. Okay, we'll talk about that. Before we get into all of your fabulous work, can you just share a little bit? Maybe you have already, how did you get really interested in delving into brain chemistry and our mammalian tendencies?
So I was raising teenagers at the time that I read this chimpanzee politics book. And as you know, the warm fuzzy view is often like suggesting like it's not their fault, it's not people's fault when they do X, Y, and Z. And so I had sort of raised my kids with that idea that whenever they do something wrong, it's not their fault. And then I started to see like, well, this is really not helpful. This is really not good. And to go deeper, so I was raised around a lot of unhappiness. My mother had a lot of emotional problems, and I saw it through the lens of a child. And so that drove my interest in academic psychology later on, because I was always trying to figure out what are people so upset about, because I couldn't figure it out with my mother. And then over the years, I thought that academic psychology would have this solution for all my kids and all my students and myself, and it didn't. So that's when I kept reading more, and I kept reading little mentions of brain chemicals in animals, and I could see like, wow, how come this is being overlooked, because it was only little mentions.
It's so interesting to me, and we do live in a "it's not my fault" culture. And I think we're seeing it over time kind of degrade in a lot of structural ways with this, "It's not my fault, it's your fault, it's the government's fault, it's society's fault." So, let's talk briefly about Rousseau, because up until reading your book, I've been a big fan of Rousseau. And I love his idea that there's this ideal time that humanity had back when we were, connected with nature. And so, but anyway, it sounds like his philosophy that society has ruined us is really under a lot of misunderstanding and myths. So why don't we talk first about Rousseau a little bit, or Rousseau?
Sure. So, fascinating example of how I got into this. I was going on a trip to Tahiti with my husband, and I had heard, like you may have, that when Western ships arrived in Tahiti, that naked girls rowed out to meet the ships and to greet the sailors, so to speak. And then as I was sort of curious, like, is this true? So I started digging, and I found that the these girls would charge the sailors a price of 1 nail per act. And this was represented as free love in the literature. But these girls were forced to do this by their fathers and brothers because metal was not available in the culture. And these sailors were ripping the nails out of the ships to the point where the ships were falling apart. And so that was just one of many things that got me looking deeper into this. What I explain in the book, the peace and love view of animals, of children, and of hunter-gatherer or tribal people that is just created by academia and is just not based in fact.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that it's permeated so much of our society, and I think we like to think that we were in a better place before.
Well, also, it's not just the better place before, but the idea is that if I'm unhappy, it's society's problem. Therefore, society has to fix it. And
Right,
that's
right.
sort of comforting. It's like, it's your problem. My unhappiness is your problem.
Right, right. I'm so glad you mentioned it because that's the cornerstone of this idea that it's society's fault that I'm having a bad life and society needs to fix it. It completely takes me off the hook for everything, and I can project blame onto everybody else and not take responsibility. And ultimately, you also basically say that not only is society not to blame for our unhappiness, but our brain naturally produces unhappiness, and and that's a new idea. So why don't we get into a little bit about the brain chemicals, the dopamine, the serotonin, and the oxytocin?
Sure. So usually I go through all that happy chemicals one by one, but then you brought up unhappiness. So, and how our brain creates. So where would you like me to start?
Well, let's start with unhappiness.
Okay. So
Unhappiness, yeah.
unhappiness. So in the state of nature, life was full of threats. Predator threat is what people hear about. That's kind of dramatic. But also, if you found a fruit tree, you could fill your belly. But then by tomorrow morning, the fruit's all used up, and you have to find another fruit tree. So hunger was always an option. You couldn't always find water, and maybe you had bug bites all over you when you slept on the ground. So life was always challenging, and our unhappy chemicals were there to teach us to avoid things that created pain in the past. It's a long story short. And when I say teach, I mean they're like pavings on our neural pathways. So when you see anything that created pain in your past, the electricity in your brain whooshes into that pathway because it's big and it's there. And you're saying, whoa, I'm going to stay away from that. And that's how our ancestors survived.
Yeah, yeah. And so then this modern idea that happiness is the norm and unhappiness is abnormal, that is a myth.
Yeah, that's a myth that has been good for the pharmaceutical industry, but I wouldn't blame them 100% because so many different cultural forces uh, engage with that myth, and each person can find in themselves, like you just said, it's like, it's not true. I want it to be true, you know? But the bottom line is, I'm not saying that you should be unhappy all the time. So if you think of unhappiness as nature's natural emergency alert, but you don't want your emergency alert to be on all the time. Now, currently, popular philosophy is if your emergency alert is on all the time, it's society's fault. It's your device's fault. It's Facebook's fault, you know? So, the point, if you read history, is that humans have struggled with this brain we've inherited since the beginning of time. It's hard to redirect your brain so that it's not always going into the worst case scenario. Simple example would be like if you think of a herd of horses and they hear a noise and they all run. So this is a natural impulse, and it takes work to redirect yourself. And then if the other horses are running, then it's even more work to make that decision.
And to make decision whether I go with them or stay on my own,
Is this
and
a
what's the
real
right thing for me.
threat?
Yeah.
And remember that animals need to eat all day in order to get enough nutrition to survive. So each time they run, they're not eating. So would I rather stay here and eat, or would I rather run? And today's version is, would I rather focus on meeting my real survival needs, or learning from the fears of others, which sometimes are legitimate and sometimes are not?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we forget that we are mammals.
So when I say we are mammals, so we have two brains. We have the cortex that's unique to humans, which is the big pink fluffy brain that we see in pictures. But then we have the limbic system, which all animals have in common, which is like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. People always hear about these things. And the important thing is not the separate, but all together, they control your chemicals. And your talking brain does not control your chemicals. And your limbic brain controls your spine and your body. And if you learn how it works in animals, every time you are doing something that an animal could do, it's not your pink fluffy brain that's doing it. Is your limbic system is in control much more than we realize.
So when you say anytime you're doing something that animals would do, you're talking about eating, drinking, moving, responding,
Responding,
dominating. Yeah.
responding, that's it.
Yeah.
Is like, I'm taking in information about the world around me, and
Yeah.
I'm making a decision. Is this good for me or bad for me? Do I want to go toward it or pull back from it? So filtering that information is what the big human cortex does. But then it's sort of like I filter it down to either good for me or bad for me, toward or away, happy chemical, unhappy chemical.
Yeah, and I want to pause for a minute here because this is a spiritual podcast. I know we're not getting into spiritual conversations, but it's important to know that our no matter no matter what worldview we have for our soul or our spiritual self, we are in a body, and we are contained in a body, and we live with our body. And so it's very important to understand our body. It's understand our mind, our thoughts, our brains, how they react. And we can't deny that. Like, we can't deny that aspect of ourselves. Spiritual people often do that. They deny the biology, and they kind of are, so we can't do that and really be a holistic, integrated person. So that's why I think this conversation is so important, to really understand how it is that, like I believe that the soul contains the body, and not everybody believes that, but the body is our vehicle on this planet. So it has an operating system, and we live in that, in the constraints. We live in those boundaries. So this is why this conversation for me on a spiritual podcast is so important. And I can't wait to get into the societal norms and all of the things that society thinks is bad, but we can't help it because it's our biology. Really want to get into that. Looking
Well,
forward to
there's one
that.
more huge component of this operating system. So we are not born with connections between our neurons. We're born with billions of neurons, but they're not hooked up. So you may have heard that animals can run with the herd a day after they're born because they're born hardwired. But humans take a whole year to walk, and maybe a decade or two to be able to meet their own survival needs. Like a monkey learns to get its own food in a few weeks, but humans maybe take a few decades to learn to get their own food. So, how does that happen? Is because every time you get a reward, your neurons connect, and a happy chemical is released, and it's like your brain saying, "Oh, that was good for me. I'll repeat that." And that's how our wiring works. So every one of us is wired non-verbally with early experience of reward and pain. And then as we get older, we don't know why we're happy about this and unhappy about that. We don't remember the childhood moment, and it's even considered like weak and foolish to do things just because that's, your childhood habit. But that's how the brain works.
Yeah, and it's very, very good to be aware of that. Can we talk about the happy chemicals now a little bit? Because I think that that's very useful to understand that the distinctions there.
Yeah. So, in my books, I talk about dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. So, dopamine is the big one that is the forward gear of our brain that says, this is going to meet your needs, go for it. So, what turns it on is a combination of an unmet need and the expectation that you can get it if you go for it. So, that's a lot of ifs. And you could see why it would differ with each person because it's wired by whatever met your needs in your past. So that's how you learned when to go for it and when not to go for it. And in the modern world, we mostly hear negative things about dopamine. And I don't agree with the way this has been twisted. But for example, you learn to blame your social media for your dopamine, and you learn that you have too much dopamine. But we're not meant to have dopamine all the time because simple way of thinking about it is you're not expected to have a peak experience all the time, but also because in the animal world, you would only release it when you see like a resource in the distance that tells you to go toward it. So if you release it all the time, then you'd be wasting your effort going toward when there was nothing there.
Yeah. Okay. Before you go on, dopamine. So that's the go for it. That's the I'm going to go catch that football, or I'm going to go ask the girl to dance, or that kind of thing, right? Okay. And so when you mentioned social media, is that like getting the likes and like I have dopamine. They talk about dopamine hits when you're on social media. That's when a lot of people like my stuff or share my stuff, and it's like I'm getting a lot out of this because people are responding. Is that what the dopamine hit is?
That's part of it, but they also use it for the called scrolling, when a person just keeps scrolling like
Okay.
all of their free time is
Okay,
spent
got it, got it.
scrolling. It's a little of both, but
Okay.
the reward value of getting likes is partly the social chemicals. We can move on to
Yeah.
serotonin and oxytocin. So in the modern world, our physical needs are more easily met. So we invest more of our energy in meeting social needs. And that's why we have these life or death feeling about social rewards, even though it's not really life or death if you get invited to a party or even if you get invited to a meeting. But because we're not walking on the savannah for 10 miles to get protein, we have that extra energy to worry too much about this stuff. So we have two kinds of social needs. Oxytocin is that common herd thing that we hear about, but it's really that selfish urge for protection. When animals seek a herd, it's like, I'm going to hide behind you so that you're the one that gets eaten. You don't hear much about that. But then serotonin, so there was throughout the 20th century, there was research on the competitiveness of animals, and the more competitive individuals got more mating opportunity and spread their genes. And that's why we've all inherited our genes from individuals that succeeded enough in what we might say the social marketplace to pass on their genes. And so if I have frustration in my daily life, it's hard to get social dominance in the real world. So if I get 10 likes on social media, then that may give me that one-up feeling that serotonin brings. But then the dopamine part of it is that tomorrow I hope to get more than 10 likes. But if I get less than 10 likes, then my brain sees that as a survival threat rather than I get the cortisol rather than the dopamine.
Interesting. So serotonin is that the seeking social dominance, and you're very clear to say that we're wired for this, even though socially this is considered a bad thing. Naughty, naughty, naughty. If for anybody who seeks social dominance, even though we are wired for this in some way, we're wired to have those one-up moments, and um, even though our society says it's taboo.
We're wired to enjoy that feeling, but we're
Okay.
not wired for the specific ways to turn it on. So each of us is wired by our own past experience. So if I get serotonin by being, one person gets it by being nice, and one person gets it by being not nice, for example.
Yes, yes. Right, right. So you can seek social dominance and have that serotonin um, kind of kick in when I am feeling that my way of one-upping is that I am a good person and that I'm always giving. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but it's complicated because two things. I like the way you said kick in. So the way this works is you only get a spurt in each situation. So that's why social comparison is unfortunately a big part of life. So a person who needs to feel I'm a good person, they often get that kick by comparing themselves to someone else and thinking, I'm better than that person.
Right, right. And that's hidden from people. It's hidden. There's a lot of that's very, very hidden. And like the whole moral superiority thing, like I am a better person than you or than him, that poor unfortunate person, because I'm so moral. It's a funny thing that we do, to know that that's not just, coming out of the goodness of my heart. That's something that kind of gives me that little high of I'm a little better. I'm a little better. And that we do this all the time.
Yeah, and I'm not really condemning it because if you say I'm not going to do it ever, then you would not have serotonin and then you might be depressed. I don't usually use that word, but I think it fits here. And so finding a decent way to do it is the challenge of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the statements that I wrote down is serotonin is associated with a calm confidence that you can meet your needs in a world full of rivals. That's kind of a very realistic and positive way of putting it. And the world is full of rivals, and I think a lot of us don't want to think that either, even though we're constantly looking at the others and
Yes.
not liking them.
Yes. And the way I think about it, where I live, everyone's always was always like attacking the person with a big car, like hating the person with a big car. But they say that because they don't really want a big car. And then, but they are doing the social comparison dance on some other issue. So everyone has the social parameters that matter to them and the ones that they don't care about. So they can pat themselves on the back for the ones they don't care about and then point fingers at others who care about them without noticing their own social comparison dance.
Yes, and these are all mammalian behaviors.
Yes. And like I said, I started reading this book about chimpanzees, but then I went on to every other mammal, and they all have it, all except two species. But they're all just crazy competitive over mating opportunity. Animals are totally picky about who they mate with because if they get a better partner, then more copies of their genes will survive. It's mind blowing. And
Yeah,
then
and how do they know that though? I mean, like it's kind of instinctual, right?
well, so here's the amazing thing. It's instinctual, but for each species, it's focused on a particular trait, and biologists have learned that that trait is a valid indicator of the survival prospects of the young. And for all different reasons, it's amazing. And then to think that a lot of our neuroplasticity is in adolescence when we're dealing with all of this. But a famous example is orangutans. So people may know, like, orangutans have these huge jowls, they're very funny looking. And they only get them when a male dominates a territory. And it has been learned that if you're like a smaller male, you have lower testosterone. But if your neighbor dies of natural causes and you get to take over his territory, you get a testosterone surge and your jowls grow and all the ladies want you. Isn't it mind blowing?
It is. It is. It is. It kind of reminds me of the beta fish, where they're little. I don't know what they are, but they come out right here around their face when another male is around. Um,
What species?
The betta fish, the Siamese, that's the little fighting fish. It's a beautiful fish that has all these. They're blue and they're red, and but
Oh,
when they see another male,
oh,
they're kind of like jowls. They just kind of pop out like that.
oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes. See, so
yeah.
every
So
species has some version, but the
yeah,
core chemistry is eerily familiar.
yeah. So what is it with humans? Because I think humans have different things they're looking for in their mates.
Yes, so this is the thing, and again, people have studied this, but again, from the warm, fuzzy perspective.
Yeah.
Um, but one example is if a woman has a small waist, um, so it shows that she's not already pregnant.
Mm, mm.
So in the animal world, to get a female requires a huge investment of effort, and it's often quite risky because you get into a battle with a rival. So if you're going to invest all that effort in a woman who's already pregnant, that would be not effective. So that's why a small waist is so attractive. It's like, okay, she's worth the investment.
Interesting. Interesting. There are fewer and fewer of us with small waists, that's for sure these days. Um, so,
But that it's such a big deal on television because the eye is drawn to that.
well, that's true. So you're right. Who they put out in front of us as stars or iconic or models,
Yeah.
that's not necessarily the person we meet in the bar or at church or whatever, but that's who they're putting forth as the
Yes.
attractive ideal that biologically we would be interested in. That's a
Yes,
good
but the
point.
interesting thing to know is that it's a mathematical thing, so that if you are 100 pounds overweight, but you wear some kind of corset or some kind of eye-catching feathers and fluff, as long as you create that ratio of proportion between waist and hip size, it still catches the eye.
Wow. Because we're mammals. Interesting. Okay, so
And by the way,
dopamine is
every cover of Oprah magazine. So she's figured that out. I wish I knew that years ago, but yeah,
I've gotta go look at those
yeah,
then.
every
Okay, so
cover.
she
She
okay,
pulls it off. She pulls off the ratio in whatever trick photography it takes. And it looks
interesting.
attractive.
Sure, yeah, okay. Alright, so dopamine is that go for it, serotonin is that the one-upmanship that we do, oxytocin is the reward that a mammal has for sticking with a group, even though sometimes sticking with a group is unpleasant. I think that is really huge in today's world where we're kinda looking for belonging, and there's so much out there that divides us, and the minute you bring something up, if that doesn't go along with the group, you're you're pushed out, or you don't even approach that group. It's just so interesting to think that this is a mammalian thing that we're doing, and it kind of explains things. It makes me understand it better.
Thank you, thank you. Well, the book I'm currently working on is on herd behavior. Exactly. And again, everyone wants to condemn it in people who they perceive as rivals and not to see it in themselves. But the bottom line is that animals have a lot of conflict in their groups, so they would prefer to distance themselves. But if they do that, then a predator might wipe them out in a second. So oxytocin is your reward for staying close when there's a threat. So normally it takes a threat to keep you in the group. And that's why our groups are constantly driving ourselves crazy, driving us crazy with talk about a common enemy, whoever that enemy may be.
It's rampant. We all want this enemy this them over there, and that we can hate on them, and our group can feel, good about ourselves, and it's just so fascinating to know that this is a mammalian response. The other thing is I think you said that, oh, I don't remember the words, but kinda like when there's stressors, it would cause you to want to be in a community or in a group. And I think we're getting stressors constantly from the media and just keep us really, really stressed. And it causes us to form these little tribes or these little herds that all hate each other.
Yes, but interesting to think about how humans have done this from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
So if you look at any historical period and you get into the details, it's like, oh my God, everybody was always at war with their neighbors. And the verbal brain finds some intellectual way to justify it.
Interesting. All right. So that's the condition that we're in. This is like who we are, how our bodies were designed, and that they're designed to keep us to survive. They were designed to survive and to thrive, and that we have these ways of having these kind of injections of happy chemicals that keep us going and help us make our decisions. And so then here we are as mammals, and we're separating ourselves, and we're at war, and we're fighting, and we're doing these things. So now we need to go into what can we do? Perhaps before we do that, maybe we should cover the politics part and how the world of medicine, media, and academia, and the helping professions kind of fan these flames.
Yeah. So in the book, I used the word politics in the traditional sense that in order to be popular, you have to do something popular, you know? So telling people that they got to fix themselves is not popular. I can tell you because I'm trying it and it's not popular, you know?
Right, right.
So these various institutions in our lives we are relying on to filter our information about the brain and wellness are really competing for our popularity. And so they're telling us things that we might want to hear, but are not really good for us in the long run. And those, I pick on the mental health professions, the pharmaceutical industries, the media. So that's where we get these ideas that there's a fast, easy solution, that we could all be happy in some way. If one fast, easy solution doesn't work, then there is some other fast, easy, because there's so many people trying to sell us that.
It is fascinating. I mean, as a minister, I led a church for 10 or 12 years, and I'm very much also that we've got to fix our own problems. And I actually think Jesus as a master teacher was that way too. It's like, pick up your mat and walk, you know?
Yes, but also sometimes the problem is not as bad as you think, you know? Like Jesus had bad problems in the end, but before the end, he put his problems in perspective rather than say, poor me, why don't they like me? Right?
Right, right. Oh, and he stood out as nobody likes me. I mean, he had his group. He had his little group. His group was 12. Okay. So he talked to a lot of people, but he was not saying popular things. You know, he was really completely disruptive to the whole temple life and the political life of the world, the political world of the time. And I think it's a real example of that. And I think about people in history that really stand up, and they all kind of did that, but it's very hard to do. It's very hard to stand up and speak in a way that's not popular. And you feel that, you know, everybody hates me. I don't have a social group, and you got to keep going. But that's kind of what I think it ultimately takes.
Can I just interrupt though on one thing on that?
No, please.
I'm often saying, thank goodness I don't have a social group, because your social group is what obligates you to do so many of the things in your life that you don't want to do. And as soon as you realize that you're not going to get eaten by a predator when you leave them, then you could just decide for yourself whether you want to do these things rather than only doing them for group approval.
Yeah. Yeah, I really completely get that. There is an obligation to the group, and I think that's why, you know, often if there's like a retreat or a vacation experience where you're with a group and you're with them for a short period of time and there's a high, but you kind of know if you kept going that real life would start trickling in, and you could do it for 5 days or 10 days or 3 days or whatever, but could I do this, be with this group for a lifetime and be obligated to this group?
Yes.
It really is, it causes me a lot of stress personally. I'm kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you.
Well,
Yeah.
because when you're with the group in this protected situation and you're not really judging them because the whole point of being there is to get along and you don't want to be the
Yeah.
one who doesn't get along. But I use the example of if you're with a stranger on a plane and you tell them stuff that you wouldn't tell a person in real life. And
Yeah.
what bothers me is like ladies' lunches. When ladies get together and have lunches and they badmouth men and they say, all the things they say. But really, ladies are giving each other a pass at that moment. But then if the ladies had to undertake practical activities together, their judgment would turn on.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting being in those settings. I watch myself a lot, and there's always this, should I speak? Should I stay silent? Should I speak? Should I stay silent? And usually I stay, usually, not always, but I find myself staying silent a lot because it's like the point of us getting together is to have a good time. And so we have a good time. I bite my tongue, or change the subject or figure out a way to just kind of get along. Um, and for that short period of time.
Mm.
Uh, and then you go away later and go, why didn't I say something?
Yes. I'm there all the time. And so yeah, we have three choices. So one is to say something and then you worry like that they never going to talk to me again. Or could you say something and not worry if they're ever going to talk to you again? Now, I guess that's the ideal. I don't know. But
Yeah.
then you could just not say anything or I not be with them as much time because it's no fun for me to be with them if I have to bite my tongue the whole time.
Right.
So that's
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I told you my husband and I were on a group tour in Sicily, and it was really beautiful. But and loved it. It was fabulous people. But there were a lot of times where you could tell there was kind of a group think that we didn't have this exact same ideas, so we just kind of let them do their thing. We're not going to be the ones saying, "Wait a minute, we think differently."
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a perfect example. It's like I've been in groups and then I think, oh, I've been looking forward to going to this place and now half of my attention is on having to listen to these people spouting whatever they're spouting.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's the obligation. It's the downside of the group
Mhm.
experience.
Mm.
And that's it. We're always, just like you point out, that the gazelle or the antelope, they're having to make these same decisions, you
Yes,
know?
yes. And that our brain is designed to make those decisions. And so it's like, oh, I guess then I'm capable of and then I say to myself, I'm lucky I even have a choice because in the past you were just forced to be with the tribe every minute and eat what they eat and dance the same step that they dance. And so,
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's turn to happiness is a learned skill, and it's something that we are responsible for and that we can learn.
okay. So, we hear a little bit about this in the modern world, but to a large extent, they're selling this idea that some people are happy because they got better genetics or a better hand of cards. So the fact that it's a learned skill and that anyone can learn it, and I liken it to learning a foreign language because everyone knows it's possible to learn a foreign language in adulthood, but it's so hard that most people don't. Yet we learned foreign language in childhood without knowing that we were making an effort. And in the same way, we learned our emotional wiring in childhood in the same way, just from repetition of what's around us. So it's really that choosing to repeat something different and then having to repeat it a lot.
Yeah, it is hard to learn. It's hard to break habits. It's hard to think new ideas, and it's hard to learn new skills. And we can do it.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So, and the way to do it, so I have learned from animal training. So, you know that a dog gets a treat when it takes the new step. And the dogs are eager to be in a training class because they know they're going to get a treat. So, we need to find ways to treat ourselves when we do the healthy choice, whereas most people treat themselves when they do the unhealthy choice, such as you tell yourself you had a bad day, so you open a bottle of wine, or you tell yourself that you had a hard life, and so you yell at somebody. So instead, we can save these treats for when we're taking that new action that we want to build up.
So what would be example then? So I had I had a good day today, or I did something that really was good for me today, and then I reward myself. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So, first, there's an art to finding healthy rewards. So, uh, if you say, I'm going to reward myself with a pint of ice cream, that's not going to be a good strategy in the long run. But if you like ice cream, you could have a small amount and only have it when you take that hard step that you need to take in your life. And you're scheduling it. So I have planned this hard step. I'm going to take it every day, and I'm not going to have my treat until after I take it is an
Okay.
example.
Okay. Oh, because it's your own, it's like your own training program. I
Yes.
got that. Okay.
And the
All right.
treat doesn't have to be food, but it's just something that you like. And the focus for me is on the fact that you have to like it, because so much of this modern wellness theory, they say, well, instead of having a bottle of wine, you should do some push ups. But needless to say, that the brain is not going to see that as a desirable path. So that's why in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have donuts, because at least it's attractive and it's better than heroin. You know what I mean? So each
Mm-hmm.
person can build their own reward structure. I have a couple of ideas to suggest. So one of them, I love comedy. So I use comedy for my reward. And I, have multiple rewards each day. Like, for example, if you're going to have a second cup of coffee, don't have it until you've done that hard task. And you have your comedy break. But also, sometimes I have watched movies, like I watch 20 minutes at a time, and then I go back to my difficult task, and then I go back to watching 20 minutes of a movie, because now I'm really motivated to do that unpleasant task because I want to get back and see the next chunk of the movie.
Interesting. And our normal behavior though is to just get stuck in the unpleasant task, stop doing it, complaining about it, bitch about the world and my upbringing, society, the government, whatever we want to do, and just kind of tumble into this darker place. That's what we normally do.
Exactly. And then once you're in the darker place, you give yourself permission to eat a whole pizza or whatever the thing is for you. And that's a cycle. It's just worse and worse. Then after you eat the pizza, then you repeat the whole cycle.
And this is because you eating the pizza is releasing these chemicals, these kind of rewarding chemicals. And so we're training ourselves. Is that right? We're training ourselves then to get into the darker place again. Is that right?
Yes, but it's one more little complication that's added because, we could blame the pizza industry for advertising and pushing all the pizza on us. But the bottom line is, for one person, it's pizza. For 10 other people, it's 10 other things. It's whatever gave you peace in a bad moment in your early years. That's what wires people. So, to use a common example, let's say a child is in an unhappy home and they pick up a video game and they stop listening to what's going on around them while they're doing the video game. And then the next time there's conflict around them, they pick up a video game. So the video game it's not just the chemicals that it's triggering, but it's the distraction from the negative chemistry, because that's a real physical pathway that your electricity flows into. And it takes another big pathway to get yourself out of it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks for that clarification. This is really interesting. And I love that you say It's not like a blanket solution that everybody has a different way to reward themselves. Everyone has different ways to distract themselves. Everyone have different ways to get into this dark place and to get out of it. And that we really need to find what our way is, our paths are.
And everyone, if they want, can find out how that got wired when they were young. Like, how did I first learn to see this thing as a reward and to see this, to create this dark place? And it's amazing. So the way I learn this is I read a lot of biographies. And it's amazing to see how every single person recreates their childhood. And everyone we know for something important, they were already doing that thing when they were a kid. It's unbelievable.
Very interesting. So that's really important for us to go back and look at our childhood and just really dwell in that space a little bit to analyze ourselves and feel those feelings from the past and to look at what our behaviors are. And I'm thinking about that now as I'm talking, because I know I am not. Food is not my reward. It's never been my reward. I know it's not my reward. And I'm thinking back in my childhood, I really wasn't my reward in my childhood. So I could see why it would be for a lot of people.
Yes, exactly. When I was growing up, food was not my reward, but it was my mother's reward. So I was sort of in that culture. And so I had to learn ways of managing it because I could very easy flow there because I have the wiring. So I had to learn other rewards, but while not making food taboo. Because see, that's another thing is like
Yeah.
I live in a part of the country where there's a lot of food taboos.
Yeah. Where are you? Are you in California?
Yeah, yeah.
How did I guess? Oh gosh. Um, all right. So I've got a few questions for you. Are are we like biologically inherently selfish, self-focused?
Yes, this is just how the brain works. So I know that everybody wants to think, yes, but altruism is good. And then other people say, yes, but altruism is a proven thing. So how can we reconcile these two things? Well, if you believe that you will be rewarded for altruism, then you do it. And now there are many variations, like if you will be rewarded for the appearance of altruism,
Yeah.
and if you have a fear of other people, and then when you remind yourself that you're altruistic, then that relieves your fear. So that's not really unhealthy in a way, you know?
Yeah, I've wondered this because in the spiritual world, there's a lot of talk about how, we need to move from service to self to service of others. And I just don't think everyone's naturally wired to be in service to others. I take exception to that because I think some people love to be in service to others. Some people are givers and helpers, and that's great. And others express themselves in other ways. And if you say that ultimately we need to evolve to all serving each other, then you're like kind of denying someone's natural nature to express themselves in another way. I just kind of wondered about that. If even if you're in service to others, there's a kind of a selfishness to that because it makes you feel good.
Yeah, well, the more important thing is if we talk about cooperation. So, in order to meet your own needs, if you cooperate with others, then you expand your own ability to meet your own needs. And as soon as others see that you're not a reliable cooperator, then they're not going to work with you, and then you're going to be less able to meet your own needs. So you could say you're cooperative, but you could also say that selfishness is the driver of that cooperation. But
Yeah.
there's another big piece of this that I focus on, which is people who think they're serving others, but what they're doing is not really helping. And they're just doing it because it gets them a reward, but it's not really helping the person they purport to help.
Yes. Yes. And that's something to be very mindful of for all the givers and the servers of the world. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about how our culture rewards victimhood. we we live in a world where being a victim and having something having happened to you, and you having no real agency, and it is somebody else's fault. That is rewarded behavior. That person gets a lot of attention, and I think culturally this is getting problematic. I think it's probably always been around, but I feel like it's escalating. Do you see that too?
It's terrible. It's terrible. And on so many levels, in so many ways. So, the political aspect people can think of, the education system people could think of, and the media people can think of. But also, there's the whole child rearing. So, the younger and younger you get that message, the less of a foundation you have for your own problem solving and skill building. So, it's hard, but I comfort myself with the idea, like you said, that it's somewhat of a philosophy that has always appealed to people. So every generation has to relearn. So every child is born helpless, and everyone has to learn to rely on themselves in order to meet their own survival needs. For most of human history, there was no birth control. So by the time you were a teenager, you had your own kids to provide for. So you couldn't just hang around thinking about whether you're completely fulfilled.
That's true.
You had to just take whatever way of meeting your child's needs was immediately available. And then there was another child and another. So it's really, birth control was invented in the 1960s. So this is really a very new cultural challenge. And round one has been really challenging, and hopefully round two will improve.
We'll see. Yeah, and I think that human culture goes through cycles. I'm trying to remember the term of these cycles, but every 20 to 22 years or so, and there's a cycle of kind of like of birth, and then the next group or the next age kind of relies on that success, and then there's a pinnacle, and then there's a degradation, and then there's an implosion. Like the Great Depression was like the implosion, and how people who are reared in that environment, they're completely different than the people who were raised in opulence and just kind of like floating on the achievements and the accomplishments of the prior generations. And so I think we also create these cycles socially. And that's not a part of your book or what you talk about so much, but I do think that there's always hope when we get to focus on our own victimhood.
Yeah, exactly. But the bottom line is each person has a choice of where they go in their mind, and each person can find their own power and feel good about their own power, because the victim mindset is very disempowering and it just creates your own misery.
Do you have a pathway to move out of victimhood?
It's basically the whole usual thing of I can focus on the positive rather than the negative. I can make myself feel good by meeting my own needs in small steps. And each time I do it, I create neural pathways that make it easier. But if I have this tabooness, oh, I can't meet my own needs because I'm an altruistic person, so I can't focus on meeting my own needs, then you're going to expect others to meet your needs, and then you're going to find fault with them because they're not going to do it up to your standards.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to get to a place where, I'm finished with being a victim. I want to be a victor, or I want to be, a vessel for, the allness. It's an evolutionary thing. And I actually kind of think that's where the spiritual kicks in sometimes to move us from one level to another. We always have a choice, but there's gravity associated with social social pressures to stay in a certain place, and it really takes a lot of strength to say I'm not going to be a victim anymore.
But
And
also, you mentioned about being a victor, so that can get ugly sometime. Like if a
yeah,
person says, I have the right to step on people because people have stepped on me. So a simple animal way to look at it is that whether you're feeling one up or one down, it's just a chemical that is just released for a few seconds and your body metabolizes it in a few minutes. So whether you feel like you're the little monkey that never gets the banana or the big monkey who gets all the bananas, that's just a momentary feeling that will come and go, will constantly change. And we naturally want the good feeling of being the monkey who gets the bananas. But if you get that, it doesn't last. It doesn't last for anybody. Even if you think somebody is a monkey that gets all the bananas. No, because they're with bigger monkeys who are trying to take their bananas. So nobody gets this good feeling all the time. So the skill in life is not to waste your energy thinking I'm never going to get a banana, but just to focus on where's the next banana that I can get.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And that's where we really have agency to focus
Yes,
on what's
yes,
my next thing that I can do
yes,
for me.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. So what else do you want to share about our mammalian brain and how we can create our own happiness? Is there anything else that we didn't cover?
Well, I always talk about social comparison. So the idea of how many bananas is that person getting? And if you think they got 3 bananas and you only got 2, then your 2 bananas suddenly feel less satisfying. So this is an animal thing, and animals really do it. And it's important to be aware that you're doing it yourself, because otherwise you think other people are doing, oh, they're judging me because I only got 2 bananas. And like, no, they're not judging you. You're judging all the time. And to
Yeah.
just accept that animals do this. And you know what? I have a bunch of toddler grandchildren now. And oh my gosh, the way they fight over toys, like here's go to the park with them and there's a toy sitting there and nobody wants it. But the minute one kid wants it, then another kid wants it. And then I don't have a dog, but I read that if there's a dog and a kid in the same room, the dog wants the toy that the kid has and the kid wants the toy that the dog has.
Well, interesting wiring that we have. Okay, I've got one last question because we've been talking a lot about our brain chemicals and being very mammalian. But I'm wondering about like empathy and compassion and mercy and some of these what people would consider, higher level expressions of humanity. And where does that fit in to your work?
Great. Thanks for the question. So, obviously, I believe in them and they're good. The reason I don't use this kind of language is because, as I said, I took yoga classes in California for 10 years, and I felt that those concepts were misinterpreted. Also, I was a college professor for 25 years, and again, I felt that those concepts are being misused in a way of good guys and bad guys, which is the way the animal brain works. So we're the good guys because we have compassion, and they're the bad guys because they don't have compassion. Or everything I do, I put an empathetic spin on it, but when this person I don't like does it, they could do the same thing, but I put an unempathetic spin on it. So it's just the verbal brain playing the social comparison game. And that's why, despite I think those are very valuable goals and aspects of life, but I'm glad you are addressing these issues, and I've just shied away from them because of my experience.
Yeah, I
And
get
also,
that.
I have to say that when my mother was screaming at us, she was telling us that we were not compassionate. So I probably got wired in with like negativity about that thought loop.
I get it. And I think there is a way to like absolutely express that without comparison, but it's a probably pretty high level of consciousness and unattachment. But I think the most important thing to come away with is that we need to watch ourselves and how we use this to kind of one up, I'm merciful and you're not. We really need to look at what's underneath that. Sometimes there is that, comparison and making ourselves better. I saw a Facebook post by a Facebook friend of mine recently, and it was something along the lines of, oh, I can't remember it verbatim, but it was something along the lines of, those people that you don't understand or that don't get what we get.
Mm.
that kind of thing. Rather than be angry at them, just think at them as being uninformed or uneducated, or they just haven't learned that yet. And it was kind of it was such a way of putting those people down. And oh, I know it was something along the lines of when you spiritually evolve, you recognize that not everyone is evolved as you. And I was like, when you're spiritually evolved, you're not noticing the evolution of anybody else around you. When you're spiritually evolved, you don't care how anybody else is, and you're not comparing yourselves, and you're not putting them down or putting them up. When you're spiritually evolved, you don't even make that statement.
Yes, exactly. And you just reminded me. So evolve is another word that I don't use
Okay.
because it's another way that people use to externalize when they
Yeah.
say we as a species haven't evolved. In other words, it's not my fault that I'm a jerk, but maybe in 1,000 years people will be nice without effort. And until then, if I'm a jerk, it's not my fault.
Right. I'm just part of this species, and this is where we are in evolution. It's very much an individual journey. I mean, if there's any evolution going on, it's me. It's not like I'm a part of this big group that I
Exactly.
am blaming or projecting onto.
Or
It's
my
just
genes. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's one other thing we should talk about. There's this concept that's going around now, pathological altruism, where, there's all kinds of words for it, but a person who feels that they must always serve others, even when others are using their cooperativeness for not good ends.
Okay. What about that?
So that's also why I don't use concepts like altruism and empathy,
Okay, got
because
it.
if you
Okay, got
use
it.
them in ways like, the cliche simple example is if someone asks you for money and they're going to use the money to buy drugs. So that's like the simplest example. But
Okay.
it could also be, if you, let's say, provide for someone and then they're cruel to you, you are training them to go out into the world and think that they could be cruel to people, and those people will respond by just giving them stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, the last question I have is about SSRIs and depression, because it's an industry, and I have friends who are on these SSRIs that can't get off, and they've been on them for decades, and it makes me so sad. What do you think? I know this isn't necessarily your thesis, but can we get off these things and learn how to manage our own brain chemicals?
Good question. So first I have to acknowledge that there's, legal liability in talking about this.
Yeah.
So we agree that, we're not giving medical advice, blah, blah, blah. And if it's working for anybody, good. But do what's working for you. But the reasons that it could possibly not work are not given proper attention because all of the research is funded by the people who make the drugs. It's insane.
Mhm.
And the regulatory process is funded by those people. Hopefully it's going to change. So the bottom line is, once you go on them, your brain habituates to them, and you do not grow in your ability to make them yourself, and you really decline in your ability to make them yourself or to stimulate them yourself.
Mm.
So that's one problem. And frankly, another theory that's going on now, which I don't agree with even, is food. Like if you eat the right foods, then you will make, and I don't agree with that either. If you go around with this poor me mindset and you eat all the superfoods, you're still going to have a poor me mindset.
Right, right, right.
But so if a person is on them, one of the reasons it's hard to get off is because doctors have never been trained to get you off them. They have been trained in this belief system that says you need it for life. So it was never promoted for temporary use. That's how the opioid thing happened, because then opioids, rather than being seen in a temporary way, began this permanent journey like so many of these things do. So the combination of your doctor is not skilled at guiding you to get off, plus your body habituates. So then you have these possible side effects when you get off that have not been properly researched. And then, frankly, people form support groups to help each other get off. But sometimes there's a suggestion factor that when other people in your support group are having side effects, then the suggestion can create more side effects. It's sort of like going to Alcoholics Anonymous and all anybody talks about is how much fun they had partying in the past, you know. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, so my opinion is whether you take them or whether you don't take them, the solution to life is always to find a goal, break it into small steps, take the steps and reward yourself in healthy ways. And especially for young people, because once they start medicating young people, they almost always end up on multiple medications, and then they start interacting, and then they even more fail to develop the skills to spark them naturally when they're taking the meds.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. It is my hope that we are equipped to restore our ability to produce our own happy brain chemicals and learn how to reward ourselves and create our own happiness. Yeah, yeah. I think your work is so important. And before we close, I just want to make sure, do you have any last words that did we not cover something?
Thank you. Well, I'm really empathizing with parents. You know, it's so hard to make these decisions these days. And so I see my kids struggling with this, and I remember my own struggles. So when you said that we talked about the warm, fuzzy view in animals and how it's hard to let go of that because we want to think that animals are always having peace and love, and we want to think um, hunter-gatherer tribal people always having peace and love, and we want to think children are always having peace and love, but children have a power instinct just like everybody else, and the more power you give them, the more power they'll take. And yet in modern culture, if you don't reward a child's demands, you can be perceived as cruel, abusive, judgmental. And then before you know it, their years of neuroplasticity have gone by and they're hardwired now to just make demands and expect the world to meet demands. So it's a really challenging issue, and I'm focusing on parenting as much as I can.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea that you brought in because people are really looking around and they don't want to look like a bad parent. When your kid acts up in the toy store or whatever, everyone's looking at that crying kid. What's that parent going to do? And are you going to reward them for the bad behavior just to quiet them down so you don't look like a bad parent? Or are you going to do the right thing for them and, pull them out, whatever it is that doesn't reward them for the bad behavior? It's tough being a parent.
Yeah, and the same then in a classroom. If you have a classroom full of kids who have gotten their way by screaming, how can a teacher possibly manage that? And then the culture does not support the teacher. The administration doesn't support the teacher. So these kids are reinforcing that, like, I can just get angry at people if I'm frustrated. And then how can you read while you're raging? You can't. So then they're not learning to read. And that's all being
Yeah.
blamed on COVID, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, COVID is something we can blame everything on now. Yeah, yeah, just another place to put the blame. Yes, okay. Well, it was so, so wonderful to talk to you. I just really enjoyed this time. I got a lot out of your book, and I'm having to integrate it all into my own worldview, and so I'm really processing. And even though we didn't really talk a lot about the spiritual life, like I said in the middle somewhere, learning our biology and learning how our bodies are wired is very important for us to to become the best person we can be. And to me, the spiritual path is becoming the best person that you can be. So thank you, Loretta. Thank you so much for your contribution and your books. And I'm just grateful that you came today.
Well, thank you so much for the great questions and for really getting it. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I'm still in my processing. Thank you everybody for being with us today, and I now close the Spiritual Forum.